Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time. And uh, I think, as President Reagan said famously in a debate once, here we go again. And as my friend Mr. Gosar said, this is about the fifth, sixth version of this piece of legislation. And before I make any comments on this legislation, I want to advise the chairman and the ranking member that I made a request to Chairman Hastings and Ranking Member Markey to delay this hearing until there is meaningful government-to-government consultation between the federal government and tribal nations affected by this legislation. And that's consistent with the federal agency and tribal memorandum of understanding that's in place right now. And I would, again, urge that consideration. I've also asking that we ask the State Department to verify that this particular decision on 687 does not violate any resolution that this Congress has passed with regards to sanctions, economic sanctions on Iran, or any company or entity that does business with them. It's our understanding that Rio Tinto, the parent company of subsidiary Resolution Copper, joint operates a uranium mine of all things in Namibia. And I would suggest that before you take my word for it or take the denials as truth, that a formal request from the chair and the ranking member to the State Department to validate and verify that. We've all passed resolutions, and the urgency of those resolutions has come for the protection of Israel. I would suggest that that is one. The last time we had a motion to recommit on the same subject, we split entirely along party lines. Democrats supporting the motion to recommit and every Republican opposed to it. Before we cross that bridge again, I would suggest we get information. This legislation, quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, is a deception. Even today, we have no one from Rio Tinto or its subsidiary Resolution as a witness available to answer questions, questions dealing with transparency, the due diligence, and what is the return for the taxpayer. There's a tattered history to this legislation and this deal, but the fundamental and consistent reasons for opposition remain the same, pre or post NEPA. The company says we're going to obey everything, but once it is in their hands and it's privatized, the federal land, no matter what is found in NEPA, no matter what is found in environmental impact statement, there is nothing the government can do to assure compliance. So when we say we're okay with NEPA after the fact, the law is moot after the fact. Native Americans, and you're going to hear from them today. We have the chairman and the president of the Hopi and Navajo Nation, as well as the chairman of the All Indian Pueblo Council, representing 20 pueblos in New Mexico and Texas that are here, not only in support of their colleagues, San Carlos Apaches, but also in opposition to this bill. And the opposition continues the same. What's the value of the resource? 60 billion, 100 billion, what's under that land? And is the trade that we're talking about, is that a fair return for the taxpayer? I understand the value is proprietary to the company, but I think some due diligence on the part of this committee to understand value and what we're giving back to the taxpayer is an important issue. I mentioned the issue of sanctions. I think all the legitimate opposition and concerns that we have is always met with you're anti-jobs, you're anti-mining. Well, I think there's a rush for this legislation because there is an erosion of local support. There is unanimous opposition among Native Americans, not only in Arizona, but across the country. And there is a track record for Rio Tinto with regards to labor violations, environmental violations, and failure to do reclamation. So why the rush? Perhaps there's a feeling there's a much more accommodating presence at the Senate that would allow this bill to go as is. Perhaps it is that there's hemorrhaging local support in the region for the mine, and let's do it now before that support eradicates entirely. Mr. Chairman, I hope that we do our due diligence and be true stewards of our public lands and the responsibility we own. We are not Walmart greeters for Rio Tinto or its subsidiaries. We are not facilitators or brokers. This cozy deal before us today in the form of H.R. 687 is the same deal we saw before and before and before. We're doing it again, and the opposition to the points remain the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.